I always do this. I get in a hurry and I lose track of where I'm at. Here it is. And welcome everyone to an exciting new series, a special series I'm creating through my podcast show, The Energy That Surrounds Us. I am calling it Riding Through the Unknown. And tonight, being episode 1, I am launching this series with a gentleman who is not only a giant among men, but is a truly awesome speaker. And I had the privilege of hearing him speak in Florida at the G6 conference and meeting him. He is a gentleman, a scholar. I give you the one and only Brad Olsen.
Well, all right. That was one of the quickest intros I've ever had, but short and sweet for episode 1, Michael. Good to be here on your maiden voyage. The energy that surrounds us. Well, we'll get into that mix in a little bit, won't we?
Yes, and for a lot of people who may not be aware of you, you have traveled to Antarctica, which is rare because not many people go to Antarctica. Or do they? And we just don't know about it.
I don't think they do. The barriers of entry are very difficult to get down there. I got a little map right above my head here. Antarctica is the 5th largest continent in the world. And currently, right now, in the middle of winter, there's only 1,000 people on the entire continent. We hear so much about the planet is so overpopulated. Well, we got a continent with 1,000 people on it. Maybe we could fill it up there. And also, did you know that Earth is really an ocean planet? The surface of this planet is covered with water, 71% of all surface. So the continents, of course, we're only familiar with the continents because we're not sailing around the world. But if you were to sail to Antarctica, you'd realize how vast the ocean is in this world. And where we went was from the southern tip of South America in a city called Ushuaia. And that is the most travel to destination to get down to Antarctica by boat. Rather than take a cruise ship, my partner at the time and I jumped on a sailboat, did a 26-day excursion. That was pretty darn intense, but crossing the Drake Passage, oh man, lost my cookies. I lost about 25 pounds on that trip, Michael. I'm not kidding you, because all the food I had in my stomach for 2 days, by the time we got on the Drake Passage, well, that came up in a second. And then I couldn't eat for 3 days. So it was a 5-day fast and sick as a dog until we got to our first drop anchor, which was the Polish Arctowski base on King George Island, one of the Antarctic islands on the west side of the Palmer Peninsula. And that's primarily where I went.
So I gotta ask, being one of the roughest seas, what possessed you to take a sailboat?
Well, the price was almost exactly the same. However, going by sail makes a 9-day trip a 26-day trip. And 5 full days in Antarctica on a cruise ship, or 15 full days on a sailboat. So that was kind of a no-brainer. But of course, there was the pre-knowledge that it was going to be rough seas and we're probably going to throw up. And so I bought Dramamine, but didn't take it in time. Note to self, Dramamine over a day before you get on rough seas. Fortunately, on the sail back, it wasn't that bad. And we took our Dramamine on time. It took longer because we had to tact against the wind. If you know about sailing, you have to go at angles. And when in our sail, if you happen to be in your bunk, you might be nice and snug against the netting with a little 30-degree angle of the boat. And then when they tacked, everything shifts. And then bam, you just roll right over and now you're on the wall for the next 6 hours. So it's kind of like that. But we had a great crew, and they were all from Poland on a Polish vessel from Gdansk, Poland, the shipping port there, where this boat was named and sailed down from, and 3 Americans, myself, my girlfriend at the time, and a guy named Luke Dog. And we're all still friends on Facebook, and the 2 Americans, I see them whenever I see them, and we're great buddies. And invariably, we always talk about the trip to Antarctica.
That's really cool. So I'm sure you get asked this a lot, but what drew you to want to go to Antarctica and research it as much as you have?
Well, probably for the same reason you'd want to go down there if you could, and you had an idea of where some of the stuff is, which is the good stuff, the UFOs under the ice, the pyramids poking through, the antediluvian civilization evidence, secret bases. So as far as I know, I'm the first researcher who's gone down there with the expressed purpose of looking into all of these. And I've just finished a 8-episode series called The Secrets of Antarctica with Forbidden Knowledge TV. That's forbidden with the letter number 4, Bidden Knowledge TV. Billy Carson's production company, and put together by Hathor Studios. So a couple weeks ago, I was in Fort Lauderdale, and we were filming for Secrets of Antarctica. So I've written quite a bit on it. It's also in my book, Beyond Esoteric, my Antarctica material, my Black Goo material, which is an island, a peri-Antarctic island, also down there as well. And was able to just port all this material over into a new book that I'm going to be working on.
Wow. How do you find time to write all these books?
That's why it takes me 3 years to come out with a new book. Exactly. Because I'm just getting drawn and pulled in so many different directions. I have 2 new authors, including Michael Jaco, and his second book just came out. In fact, it's only available on cccpublishing.com. It's actually launches at the on October 1st. And so these books are still in the pipeline. I did all the images and captions for the book, and Michael Jaco, he absolutely loved it. It's so much better than the first edition. And I'm also bringing on Laura Eisenhower and working on her first book called Awakening the Truth Frequency. And there's a little mock-up of cover. Oops, this side, right there on the top.
Okay.
Here at my little book studio in northwestern Nevada. Just bought a ranch 1 year ago. So I'm just kind of getting the hang of things here and travel quite a bit, as you know, at conferences and other trips I like to take. And I also produce a great big street fair event in San Francisco coming up in October called the How Weird Street Fair down on Howard and 2nd Street. It's electronic music, DJs, costumes, a lot of dancing, fun time. Anybody in the Bay Area, come on out to How Weird. You probably heard of it. It's kind of like a day at Burning Man, if you ever heard of that.
Right.
And also, well, then right after How Weird, I'm flying out to Orlando again, and I'll be at the GSIC conference a second time. I'm looking forward to that. And I have a brand new talk that I'm giving on first the maps of Antarctica before it was discovered. How would there be pre-knowledge of a whole continental landmass, not years, not decades, but centuries before the first discovery of Antarctica? And then I will also show evidence around the world of the builder race, the polygonal architecture and megalithic architecture, and then finish up with underwater archaeology. So the whole point of this is to show that there had been pre-knowledge of the world, that there had been a high civilization on this planet, and what we see are the remnants of this high civilization.
So I'm kind of curious, since you bring up that Antarctica's in all these ancient maps, do you think or feel that Antarctica is part of Atlantis that broke off, or Lemuria or Mu, or is this like a separate, completely from everything landmass?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because the producers of Secrets of Antarctica wanted me to get into and do a whole chapter or a whole episode on antediluvian civilizations. As I said, I went up there with the specific reason of trying to look into a lot of these subjects, including what might be under the ice as far as a high-tech civilization. So I could tell you that when I was going down there, I was talking to other people in the industry that know a lot about Antarctica, including Linda Moulton Howe and Michael Sala. And Linda told me about locations that she had talked to some of the whistleblowers about craft under the ice and the hole under the ice near the South Pole, but I wasn't going anywhere near that. Michael Sala, on the other hand, told me about a couple interesting things. One of which, he said, if you could keep going south along the west coast of the Palmer Peninsula, there's, get this, Rothschild Island. You can't
Really?
make this stuff up. Yeah. And then a little further on, if you go inland, is the Rockefeller Plateau. It's like, come on. Just right there in our face.
Is there anywhere on this planet they haven't stuck their noses?
Exactly. So, then Michael Sala also told me about some other things to look into. And I'd been looking at Google Earth, and he gave me the coordinates. This is to answer your question, could it possibly be Atlantis? Michael Sala sent me the coordinates that somebody had just given to him. And it wasn't where I was going, but it was in the New Schwabenland area of the Nazi Germany claim in the 1930s. So I blew it up, and sure enough, you can see what looks like the grid pattern to some kind of city. Could it be the Germans? I don't know. Could it be extraterrestrial or Atlantean? I don't know. If you ask Corey Good, he did a lot of Antarctica episodes when he was at Gaia, and he said he'd been to some of these underground bases or under ice bases. Because the other thing you got to remember about Antarctica, It's the most volcanically active continent in the world. And although covered with 99% ice, there are still the propensity for these giant caverns under the ice to exist with that geothermal heat. So,
which is
could be.
Yeah, and I know, and this is why I say this is a series that I'm not running through the normal show, that is because you brought up New Schwabenland, and I know from research that Germany had bases on the moon, and so do other countries. And, it's interesting that the moon always has the dark side to us. We never see it and supposedly can't communicate through it, but we can communicate around a planet that's sphere. The moon is sphere. Why we can't figure that out is beyond me. But do you think there's a connection between Antarctica and the lunar bases?
Oh, yeah. And their secret space program is called Nachtwaffen, the Dark Fleet. You aware of this big data dump? I think it was in the 1990s. Somebody sent it to a researcher, just all these plans, documents, photos, videos, and other testimony of the German UFO fleet. And that image I just showed from Beyond Esoteric is called the Honeyboo 2, which was capable of space travel. If history were to be told honestly, it wasn't Neil Armstrong that was first man on the moon in this modern age, but a German beat him there by several decades. Problem is, we don't know what that person's name is, but they were certainly there. And yes, I'm aware of the Nazi base on the dark side of the moon. Apparently, it was donated to them by their alliance with the reptilians. And herein lies the problem, because they turned to the dark side once they did that. But just like all our generals in the U.S., they were just so hungry for power in the form of weaponry that they would sell out their own people for it. And that's what the Germans did, and that's what our operations backward engineering this craft has done too. It's called the Greada Treaty. You hear about that every 10 years, it gets renewed. Next year, it comes up for another renewal. But I say it's null and void because the people of the world don't even know about it. So how could we go along with something like that?
Right. And talking about their UFO fleet and everything, I've recently started doing some deep studying into the history of World War II and was surprised to find out not only was Germany, not as advanced, meaning not as industrial as we were led to believe, meaning, had all these massive tanks, armies everywhere, and plane fleets everywhere, that they were actually made by Ford, and we supplied them and made them better than ours. But could it be that Germany put all its resources to the UFOs instead of World War II to be like a smokescreen?
Well, they knew they were going to lose the war in 1943. And that's when the process of starting to pull all their really valuable hardware out of the Skoda works, which is in what is today Czech Republic. And the Russians were the first to get there, and they got a couple scientists. Britain got a couple scientists, but by far, most of those Nazis that came over to work through Project Paperclip came to America. And if you read any of Joseph Farrell or other books on Antarctica, one called The Black Sun, Henry Stevens is the author. They talk about how these paperclip Nazis from our secret space program, such as, NASA had two arms, a secret side and a public side. The public side, they're just using antiquated Roman candles to propel rockets into space. The really exotic stuff remained top secret. and went down to South America and Antarctica. So Joseph Farrell was saying in his book that he has documented cases of these scientists that were able to carry an attaché bag as a diplomat would, which doesn't have to go through customs. So they were passing documents among themselves since the end of World War II. That's why the Nazis never lost the war. The Third Reich never surrendered. That's the political arm of Germany. The fighting forces surrendered, but the Third Reich became the Fourth Reich. And they also got all the loot out of Europe. The money man at the time, his name was Martin Bormann, and he kept popping up all over the place in South America, but he was basically the number 2 in charge. And Hitler did not die in the bunker. They just put a bullet in a doppelganger. All leaders today have them. He had them as well. The Russians even collected the skull sample, and about a decade ago finally did a DNA test on the Hitler skull, found out it was a woman. So that definitely wasn't him in the bunker. Oh, of course, like anybody, he wanted to live. He wanted to escape, and they had the ways and the means, and of course he did. So when I was down there in South America, I was finding all these places where it was like the TV series Hunting Hitler, just on the trail. There he was, and people remembered seeing him, and there were all these hidden chateaus and places that he could hunker down, one of which near San Carlos de Bariloche in Patagonia region had even a seaplane. So if authorities were bearing down on him, or the Israelis who did catch Adolf Eichmann, took him back to Israel, tried and hung him. That shook up the Nazis in exile. And our CIA got involved and said, okay, that was a one and done. You ain't coming back for any more. And they didn't. And most of these guys just lived out their natural lives and died in South America. I was driving through Bolivia. I bought a car and then sold it for the 4 months I was down there. Reading in the Lonely Planet. Okay, we're pulling into this town. What's in Oruro? Oh, it says there's an old lumber yard, and behind the lumber yard is a house you can go visit where Klaus Barbie lived out the rest of his natural life using, of course, a new name, new passport, which is all provided for in the rat lines for these fugitive Nazis to get new identities and move to South America or elsewhere. And so here's Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, France, totally escaped justice his entire life. So the third force was the Fourth Reich. And what I mean by third force, this is Henry Stevens talks about this in his Black Sun book, and so does Joseph Farrell in Nazi International. That once the war was over, they knew it was over 2 years before it was really over. They got all the best hardware and some of their scientists out of there. If you did not want to go, the Russians found a whole bunch of scientists that go to work with a cap popped in their skull. So they'll kill you rather than let you get captured. The ones that did wait till they could surrender to the Americans, like Werner von Braun and Hermann Oberth and quite a few others, they got to keep their names, but got really nice positions, including heading up NASA. That was Werner von Braun's job.
Right.
He was the one responsible for the Mercury rockets and the Apollo rockets that put the men on the moon. And I think he knew damn well that the Nazi secret space program, the Nachtwaffen, had beat us there by decades.
Right. And it was all a show, really, because, I mean, it was like one day we're sitting there going, well, we have the capacity to send somebody up for a day or two, and then they have to come back to all of a sudden, like in less than a decade, going, oh, we can actually do long-term missions. And it's like, wait, how did it advance so fast? And they claim, like you're saying, Werner von Braun, but one man cannot totally revolutionize everything to that degree without help. He had to have sources that were allowing him to disclose tech because, yeah, we just were making, advances way too fast.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they wanted to keep it for themselves. So all the disc technology went down to Antarctica and South America. So there was this other place I went to, and it was featured also in Hunting Hitler series, which was 3 seasons of 13 episodes each. It was chunky amount of information. They've basically had a crew fly around the world, all these different places. One of the episodes was on this town called La Falda, and it's in the hills right above Cordoba, Argentina, which is the second largest city in Argentina. And remember, during World War II and at the end, the fascist dictator Perón was in charge, and he was very much sympathetic to the Third Reich.
Right. They even show him visiting Germany.
Yeah. Right. So I went to visit this, the Eden Hotel, this big grand hotel like The Shining in these hills above Cordoba. The Germans always pick the best areas. They're the richest ones in South America. So they get the best locations, and La Falda, no different. You can get some sauerkraut there and a Wiener Schnitzel if you want some German food. And, all right, throw some Spatze in there and a stein of beer.
Suspicious.
Well, so then I did the tour of the Eden Hotel, and they showed pictures of the Eichhorns, the owners of the hotel, and they were all chummy with Hitler, and they would go there for the big rallies and be able to sit at his table, which is very rare. You had to be a very important person to get that close to him. So I think it was because he always said, look, if the war doesn't end right, just come here. We'll always do whatever we can for you. And he did. So at the end of my tour, Michael, you'll find this interesting. I was talking to the tour guide, and he happened to speak English pretty well because my Spanish is terrible. And and I said to him, do you really think Hitler lived? I mean, that's not what we're told in North America. He's like, well, you guys are tripping for your reasons, but we know that he did. I said, well, how do you know? He said, well, right here in town, there's an elderly woman who in the late 1940s was working in the Eden Hotel as a chambermaid, and she's an eyewitness. Saw Hitler, saw Eva Braun, saw Blondie, their pet German Shepherd. The whole crew got into a U-boat right at the end of the war and then came down to South America. And so by the end of the war, he was already a master of disguises. Plus, the elite SS also never surrendered. And not just dozens, not just hundreds, but thousands of SS men got new identities. And it's kind of like if you're in the CIA, once in the company, always in the company. Once in the Third Reich, or especially in the SS, always in the SS. In my book, Future Esoteric, I have a whole chapter called The Fourth Reich in Germany, or the Fourth Reich period, because they became Nazi International, like Joseph Farrell book suggests. So in my chapter on the Fourth Reich in America, there's good old Werner von Braun right behind Himmler. Guess what? He's wearing his Third Reich uniform. Werner von Braun was loyal to the Reich till his dying day. But he had a change of heart on his deathbed. And he had an assistant named Carol Rosen, who he told everything to in his waning days, weeks, and months. And he blew the whistle on the deep state. He must have had a change of heart, having moved to America and maybe being sympathetic to us ignorant Americans. And he told Carol Rosen, you got to tell the world this, that they're going to pull a fake alien invasion as the last thing to usher in this new world order agenda. He says, you got to tell the world this. And I heard her give a talk at a conference in the late 1990s. Her story has never changed. And now you can see the buildup to this New World Order agenda.
Right.
And they are prepping for their great reset. Okay. But they need the old problem reaction solution. They just need people clamoring to accept it. Right. And they don't have that yet. But if they really tighten the screws on us, it's called a strategy of tension, which you also kind of see happening already.
Oh, yeah.
Then maybe Americans will go for it.
It's kind of shocking in a way that Werner von Braun in the 40s and 50s knew we had the technology to make UFOs appear when they're not really there. And we're sitting here thinking, wow, we've just stumbled on this. How far behind we really are.
Yeah. Oh, way behind. They didn't give us the good knowledge. They kept it for themselves.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, too, with like Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, where flip phones started coming about and, you know, and all the technology we're getting from that show. And everyone's like, oh, it comes from the TV show. And I'm like, well, I get that, but I know it comes from somewhere else. But who leaked that out and how did that get out?
Well, it's called predictive programming, Michael, and they do allow strategic releases of information for the very purpose of getting people prepped. And it's right now you're seeing it with all the news stories of alien visitations. Latest one was down in Peru, and the locals are shooting at gray aliens. And in May, it was Lester Holt on NBC Nightly News saying the Pentagon has released information that there's a mothership in our solar system. How isn't this the biggest story ever? Why hasn't this been talked about every day since? But it's to prep people for this whole thing.
Yeah. And why is it only discussed when there's another matter of more importance going on one hand, and they're like, well, we want you now to focus on this hand, so we'll give you what you've always asked for. And they start, quote unquote, disclosing stuff, and it's like everyone's like, oh, the government's finally owning up. It's like, no, the government's telling you something that'll get you excited so they can get away with something over here.
Yeah, that's the old smoke screen tactic, right? Where
Right.
Look over here, but don't look at the man behind the curtain, kind of thing.
Right, which
photo.
Yeah, which leads me to something we were talking about backstage that we were thinking about bringing up. I think this is a good time to switch to it, is that we all think on the bottom of the ocean, due to an iceberg, sits the Titanic, but it's not the Titanic. It's the sister ship Olympic, and you were commenting that, well, I'll let you share the evidence that you were discovering about how that it's the Olympic and not the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean.
Sure. Well, you remember about 20 or 25 years ago, the first submersible made it down there, and it was no people, but it had cameras and it filmed the whole thing. And a documentary company was able to use that footage. And these bots, these submersible submarines, were floating all around it and filming it from every different angle, and discovered some very unusual things about the wreckage at the bottom of the ocean. First of all, the name Titanic on the bow, like most ships have their name on the bow and the stern, but up on the bow, the front of the ship, the letters started coming off, and underneath it you could see engraved, which is not the same as putting letters on top, but it was engraved into the hull of the ship, several letters that spelled Olympic, L-Y-M, right? That's not in Titanic.
Not even
that
close.
Was a big tell. The other big tell from this ocean floor footage was that the hull had flared out. So if it was hitting an iceberg, it should have flared in, right?
Right.
But the hull flared out as if a bomb went off right when they were getting into the ice field. And notoriously, they didn't have enough lifeboats. And that was back in the day when they say women and children first. And who was on board? None other than some of the wealthiest men in America who were coming to meet J.P. Morgan to discuss the merits of starting a Federal Reserve, a central bank. Well, J.P. Morgan pulled out at the last second and missed that ship. But several other multimillionaires, would be billionaires in today's dollars, Guggenheim and Astor, were very opposed to the creation of a Central Reserve. And they died because there wasn't enough life ships. And so the biggest opposition for creating the Federal Reserve happened just a couple years later. But the whole thing started really as an insurance fraud scam, because in this documentary, they show you that there were two ships exactly the same, built side by side in Belfast Harbor, Ireland. And right when the ships were completed, they were moving them around, doing some maneuvers. And the real Titanic, actually the Olympic, collided with another ship, and it really messed up the rudder and the props. And so it was really an insurance fraud scam to change the names and intentionally send it to the bottom of the sea. But then it also served the purpose of also getting rid of the opposition to the creation of the Federal Reserve, which occurred only a couple of years later. But you had something interesting to say about this recent attempt to go down there too. Why don't you tell that side?
Right. I believe it might have been the Astors, but there was a couple of that were the billionaires of the day who were opposed to the Federal Reserve that but died together on the Titanic. I believe it was their granddaughter's husband was the one that was in the submersible that went down to the Titanic that imploded. And so it's kind of an interesting story, but you can't help but through the eyes that we have going, why is history repeating itself of these billionaires who went down with the original Titanic are striking again and taking down another connection to that family? What did they find that this time they decided we're not letting come to the surface?
Exactly. And of course, this group that went down a few weeks ago that all died, there were several billionaires on board, and others were multimillionaires. And of course, they were going down to film. Maybe they would have found some other evidence too that it was the Olympic and that it was blown up, not hitting an iceberg. The captain, who is totally on the payola of the moneyed elites who wanted the central bank, he steered it at full steam ahead, which you should never have done, right into an ice field. Right. And then he detonated the bomb, and then the thing went down. But remember, the Titanic was called the Unsinkable, and they even said it could hit an iceberg and still survive. So it really doesn't make any sense. So those guys that were going down there probably would have filmed and maybe came out with more information. Where was it a setup to knock them off? I don't know. Maybe they had some powerful enemies and somebody found a way to screw up the mission.
Well, and the other interesting thing is I remember reading the Titanic when they were building the ship in the shipyards in Ireland. They were having crews working round the house, or round the clock, nonstop, because they were so far behind. And all of a sudden, they're like, hey, we're like weeks to months behind. And next thing you know, hey, White Star's launching the Titanic. It's like, wait, how manpower wasn't there to totally go from frame to saleable in that short a period when all their documents were saying we're behind, we don't have enough time. And so, yeah, I agree with you that there's just so many things around that ship that just being the unsinkable ship, being the namesake and how it sailed, what they were doing, just doesn't add up anymore. And when we actually take the time to sit back and say, wait a second, all of these historical stories that they're telling us from the shipyards to today, in today's terms, we're like, wait a minute, the shipbuilders wouldn't be saying we're behind schedule if they were good to go.
Right. Exactly. It's pretty clear. And the etching on the bulkhead of the Olympic, just what more do you need to know? It's impossible that ship would have those letters for the Olympic underneath the other ones they superimposed on the top.
Right. And the other interesting thing is there was the Titanic, the Britannic, and the Olympic. And after the Titanic sank, you only hear the Britannic. The Olympic just completely disappears from White Star history.
Right.
So it's
another
like
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like how does a ship just disappear?
Yeah. Exactly.
So one of the questions I have for you too is I have to admit I had to look up the word esoteric to make sure I used it in the correct form when I was going to be talking with you because of your 3 books on the esoterics. But I was interested to see that it mainly means like to keep the information from the public, that it's only for a select few.
That's right.
And so my question to you is what were they fearing around Antarctica and everything that they made it esoteric instead of just saying flat out, hey, there's stuff down here in Antarctica. What were they afraid of us learning?
That the Nazis escaped, that there's alien bases, that there's evidence for Atlantis, that there's ET bases under the ice. Pick any of those. Any one of them is good enough reason to keep some of those areas off limits, to keep the knowledge of what's going on there from making the mainstream.
Right. It's just, to me, it's like, looking at it in today's eyes of, we can have a UFO sitting on top of the Capitol and they can spin it to, oh, there's a weather balloon flying by and the masters are like, okay. So why do they keep it hidden? It's like they obviously have brainwashed the people. So why keep up the ruse and not just say, oh, hey, we can do another PR spin. Hey, look, there's an alien base down here.
Right. Yeah, well, you get the idea. That's why.
Right. So I have a friend that's a huge fan of yours. Her name's Virginia Gallen. And she actually messaged me a question for you. And I have to say, I'm really interested to hear your answer to this is, how long do you feel it will take for our weather patterns to, quote, normalize when they're no longer being manipulated?
Well, good question. Who knows? Maybe we're already at the point of no return. I hope not. I think if they stop the geoengineering programs and the chemtrailing today, 5 or 10 years, you got to remember, this has been in the works for many years, decades. In the Vietnam War, it was called Operation Popeye. and it was to flood out the Viet Cong in Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, of course, because they had the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they're bringing in all these supplies and fighting the Americans down in South Vietnam. And so Operation Popeye was a geoengineering campaign to flood Vietnam. And that's why it rained so hard on the guys, and they're getting leeches in their boots and had to go on patrol in the swamps. And it didn't really work. The Viet Cong eventually beat the Americans back. But the point is, these geoengineering programs have been going on for quite a while, and they have a military application. Let's never forget that. It's called weather warfare. So, of course, these programs are going to be held in top secret. Of course, nobody on the Weather Channel is ever going to talk about skies full of chemies. They can't. There's a gag order. You'll get fired. There are some clips of a newscaster who I'm sure is one and done when they say it. One guy up in Southern Oregon was talking about being in the military, and he knew those lines. He goes, yeah, they're spraying chaff. We used to do that in the military. Yeah, chaff is one way of clouding up the skies, but also strontium, barium, aluminum, even nanoparticles. So people really have to understand we are being poisoned by these things too. So of course we have a right to know, but that's why it's an esoteric subject, Michael, because they keep it from the general population. They don't want anybody knowing about it.
Right, which, I mean, and another program that I'm sure people are going to be hearing about soon, I hope, through all this disclosure, is the HARP program, which didn't it originate under DARPA, and did they lose control of it, or was it always meant to work and operate the way it is, independent? And
of course, do you think it went away? No way.
No.
Well, they have HARP arrays that can float around on giant flotilla barges. They can move the weather weapons right to your shore out in international waters. And then the big ones in Alaska, but also other countries. Russia has them. China has them. Saw a great video down in the Southern Hemisphere. Australia has them. Video showing all the locations from Google Earth, just zooming right in on them. There was a dozen around the world. Then, like I said, they can move them around on barges too. And that's what steers the weather. So they get the chemies up in the sky, making it reactive with those particulates they put down. Then they hit it with frequency weapons and heat up the different layers in our atmosphere, and different ones can push the weather down and then just like a bubble, pop out a rainstorm to hit the Southwest. Similarly, they can create these heat domes that we hear so much in the news, that we're the hottest July on record. How come not a single person in the Weather Channel or little Greta ever talks about geoengineering? Why is that? Why is it that this is an ignored subject when it's the cause of this global warming and the erratic weather?
Not only that, but talking about like Greta, it seems like after she's served her purpose of, I even forget what her purpose was.
Useful idiot.
They just vanish.
Yeah.
It's like you never hear her name anymore. And it's like you couldn't take 3 steps without seeing or hearing her name or her. And now it's like, Greta who?
Right. I like the picture of George Soros patting her on the head. Good little puppet child. Now just read the script and we'll get your private plane and a house in Sweden.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I've been kind of holding to now is, I know when you go to certain places, there's like an energy to the land that you can feel that's beyond like the temperature energy. So what was the energy like to you in Antarctica?
Well, here we are with the title of the show, The Energy That Surrounds Us. Good question, Michael. You should ask that to every one of your new guests. Well, it was cold. It was rough seas getting there, but then it was smooth sailing once we got in all the channels. There's no trees, there's no bushes, there's nothing really green, nothing really muddy or brown. The real colors that you see down there are the white of the ice, icebergs, white of the clouds, blue of the ocean, blue of the sky, and black of the rocks and the mountains that protrude through. It's incidentally, the animals are black and white, primarily penguins, of course, and the seals and the whales. We saw all three. And what really amazed me, they have no fear of humans. They would just swim right up to the boat. Whales swam right under our boat. It was a trippy experience. Felt like Moby Dick. And then, the penguins jump out of the water when they swim. They're really fun to watch, like dolphins. And when we were leaving Ushuaia on our sailboat, it was one day to get through the Beagle Channel, and we saw a whole pod of dolphins coming from across the channel right towards us. They heard the motor or saw us, and the whole pod came and joined us for many miles and jumping out of the water, breaching and giving us a show. It was so fun to watch. Put my arm around Emily, my girlfriend at the time. I said, "Oh, honey, this is going to be a great trip. It's going to be so fun. Look at this beautiful scenery." Little did we know, a couple hours later, we make that turn on the Drake Passage and everything changed. Roughest seas of the world between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean.
Right. So I've noticed too, there are certain areas where, like, when the sea meets the ocean, you can see there's two different colors to the water. Did you find that down near Antarctica as well, or was the water all basically the same shade of blue?
Well, it depends how deep the water is. The Drake Passage is extremely deep. I was below deck throwing up, so I missed it when we crossed the convergence. But there is a big separation that is visible of the warmer water from the northern hemisphere, northern part of the southern hemisphere, I should say, coming down and intermixing with the cold, fresh water meltage of the ice coming out of Antarctica. And there's a big upswelling of nutrients and fish and plankton that makes Antarctica very rich in sea life. You would think, being so cold, how could that be? But they thrive down there, especially under the water. A lot of life. There was a boat that was sailing alongside us, and it had scuba divers on there. And one night we were both anchored beside each other at the Vernansky base, and they invited us onto their boat to look at their photos and videos from the trip. It was amazing, Michael. It was seeing animals that were fluorescent, kind of like the coral reefs. You'd be scuba diving in Australia or somewhere tropical. Colorful animals down there. They also did some wreck dives and some dives under the ice. That looked really cool, kind of spooky. Right. If something goes wrong and you can't get up in time, you will die and suffocate. But that was kind of the feeling down there is you're living on the edge. And for example, when we were on the Drake Passage, we had to put on these vests that had a wire that snapped into the boat. Because if you fell overboard, it's all over. You would die of hypothermia within minutes before the boat could turn around, before a dinghy could get out there, especially in those high swells. You'd be dead by the time they picked up the body. So it's really fraught with danger, trips down there. That's why I say a barrier of entry to go. It's not for the weak of heart at all, not for weak people at all, because it will kick your ass. Now, if people have health issues and they really, really want to go, you can take a cruise ship, although 50% of the people on cruise ships get seasick. You can, however, fly from Punta Arenas, Chile to King George Island, where we had first anchorage. And then from there, it's quite smooth sailing in all the Bransford Strait and other passages where the waves are much less. So people can do that. They don't want to get seasick, but boy, there's a price tag on it. It's thousands of dollars, no, tens of thousands of dollars to go down there for 2 weeks.
Wow. Now, talking about being esoteric and everything, it surprises me. Like we were talking about Google Earth, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there a spot on Antarctica where Google Earth has like a gray or black box sitting in the middle of the ice field? And it's like, if you were wanting people not to look here, why are you making your quote unquote cover up so blatantly obvious and not white and just blended?
I'm not aware of that one. If you find an image or a link, I'd appreciate if you could share it with me. I don't know about the black box. That's a new one.
Yeah, it could be that somebody was doing that too. It was around when they were talking about showing UFOs entering and exiting the ice, that there was like a spot where it was not the white of the ice, and they said, yeah, this is a Google Earth image. And I was like, seems like Google would be doing a better job of hiding instead of saying, hey, look here.
Yeah, I can't comment on that because I'm not aware of it.
Oh. Yeah. But another question I have is, I know I've read in some history that like U-boats and the U.S. subs have sailed underneath the ice of the Antarctic or Antarctica into, like you're saying, caverns. Are there like the bases in there? Do they look like cities, or were the cities already there that they're finding?
Yeah, they're not reporting on it. If they're finding a city, it's certainly not going to be told to the world. If you find any information on that, please send that along too. I'm constantly trying to find all of these anomalous locations.
Right. Unfortunately, it's one of those things like you read it and then you go back and try to find it and it's been like scrubbed or it's disappeared, and you're like, did I read, misinformation, or was that something that was real that they didn't mean to leak out?
Yeah, there could be elements of that. There could be controlled leaks, such as we're seeing in the UFOlogy fields lately, that I would have to say there are no coincidences, right?
Right.
There are only controlled leaks usually, and usually many of them are for a reason. That reason being predictive programming. They want to start conditioning the mind. When the mainstream media picks up anything about paranormal, about UFOs, about aliens, I think it's a setup for Project Bluebeam. I really do. I think that's why it's all coming out now. Because the question you got to ask, Michael, why now? Why right now? They've had 75 years to come clean on this. So why now? Unless it's to condition us to be ready for when the news breaks of an alien invasion of Earth, which aliens would never invade Earth. Look, if they wanted to take over this planet just 100 years ago, it'd been pretty darn easy when all we had was gunpowder cannons and lock action bullets, which wouldn't even penetrate their force field. So my point is, if there is ever a alien invasion, Project Bluebeam, just know it's all fake. I would agree with what Werner von Braun said. It's all going to be used to usher in this new world order agenda.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, when we talk about Project Bluebeam, we're talking about technology that's been put on aircrafts to simulate and generate holographic images so that they can make a clear sky all of a sudden look like there's thousands of ships in the sky. And it's like, what, is that your understanding of Project Blue Book, or is that just some of it?
Blue Book. Anything that has the word blue in it is alien related. So Project Blue Book was the compilation of all things ET, and this supposedly was used to brief presidents until Kennedy. Kennedy was the last one that got fully briefed. And that's why when Eisenhower in 1960 said that we would be confronted with the military-industrial complex, what he was saying was essentially that this was a big danger coming ahead. And so Kennedy wanted to merge our new space program to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade, he said famously, with Werner von Braun right there at the binoculars looking up at the launch, that they wanted to merge with the Russians and make it a worldwide program of going to explore other planets in our solar system and go beyond. But Kennedy, of course, was assassinated.
Right. And so there's a quick question that's popped up in the chat room. I know you have to go because you have things to do. Do you have time for, it looks like a quick 2-part question, or
sure,
do we need to wrap it up?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so Nancy Noonian Kelly says, are you saying that we are using aliens or the threat of aliens as a cover-up? If so, are you saying there are no visitations, or there are no, or there are, and they are using the fear to cover up the other dark ops?
Well, they're definitely aliens. I don't think they're a threat to Earth. I'm saying that they are going to use the threat of an alien invasion to get people conditioned. Well, they're conditioning us now, but to get us to agree for a world government that we'll have to go up against, that we're going to have to fight off these aliens. Now, here's an interesting one, Michael. I'll tell you the story. I was a moderator of a secret space program panel at a conference, and Captain Randy Kramer was on the panel, and we started talking about Bluebeam, and Captain K, as he was once known, said, well, I'm an advocate for Project Bluebeam. So what do you mean? Coming out of the armed forces, how could that be a good thing? He said, well, they have acquired so much backward engineered technology, so many spacecrafts that's exotic energy and 0 point and free energy, that they need a way to roll it out. So Captain Kramer said, well, I'm the one to kind of tell people that they want to do Bluebeam so they can roll out their hardware and show the world what they got without having to explain to everybody, well, we just didn't tell you for 70 years. So I said, what about all the collateral damage? What about people who might die? He said, well, they take that into consideration, but they don't want it to be that long or that hard or that devastating to the planet or cities or anything like that. I said, well, who's going to be who's the alien invaders then? And he said they already had an agreement with the mantids, the insectoid species, who happens to be bipedal and very sentient, but they're still of a hive mind. And so they had volunteered to use their rapid reproduction system, just like insects can do, and donate a few thousand of these insectoids. The mantid ETs would be the invader. So if it comes down like that, Captain K would be right. And they're doing it to launch this technology that they've sequestered for decades. And America wins, just like Independence Day. Maybe they'll blow up the White House, and that might not already be such a bad idea. It's all built on a swamp anyways.
Right. So she says, like, we didn't know already. Oh, man, I hate flipping bugs. But one thing I'll ask you, and then we'll wrap it up, is talking about, disclosure of the UFOs and the aliens and everything. Do you feel that's why Trump created the Space Force, was to take away the ability of like Blue Beam and some of these to say, oh my God, we need to form a one government to fight these by saying, hey, we got a Space Force. We're not worried about these aliens invasions.
Well, we've had Solar Warden for several decades. That's what Gary McKinnon, who hacked into the database and saw non-terrestrial officers and invoices and shipments going off planet, and saw some pictures of what looked like a cigar-shaped craft. So we're very well advanced. We have all this technology. Maybe they do need just a way to show it all off, just like they do the Air and Sea Show or Fleet Week or all the military expos, but in the context of this fake alien invasion. So that's why our military would go along with it, just so they could finally say, yeah, well, we actually had all this stuff. But is it a good thing we had it? And so what if we kept it secret? Because we beat the aliens back and we won the Battle of Blue Beam. And it would be pretty realistic if we're all hanging out in the backyard watching it, and all of a sudden a ship explodes and we see parts falling and a mantis arms come flying right down and lands in the backyard barbecue. Like, wow, okay, that's pretty real.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Brad, for coming on and being a part of this series and being episode 1. I truly appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on, Michael. And just to let people know, if they want to know more about me or what I'm up to or my conference schedule, you can go to bradolsen.com, just as you see it spelled there. And if you wanted any of my books, a signed copy, they come right out of my office here in Northwest Nevada. And go to cccpublishing.com, and you can also find Michael Jaco's new books, and go in the catalog. I still have to get those on the homepage. Or you can find all the other authors that we publish here at CCC Publishing. So those are my 2 main websites. You could put them in the description below. That'd be cool. And really great talking to you, Michael. Welcome to the eTalk Network. And I think you're going to have a great success with your new career.
Thank you. And I'm kind of curious to see if you're going to be bringing your show back to the eTalk.
Gosh, if I had more hours in the day, I probably would. And I do one day want to bring back my Esoteric Circle show, just not right now. I've just got way too much on my plate, and I got to finish some big projects first, and then I'll consider doing it. But thank you. I would like to come back.
Well, thank you, and thank you for sharing that. And I will definitely share the links of where to find your stuff, because I gotta say, we have just hit the tip of the iceberg of what you have experienced and have gone through. So who knows? We might be seeing you on the show again.
Sure thing. And you got some great guests lined up to come on. Tony Rodriguez, Alex Collier. Man, you got some good shows coming up. Tell those guys I said hello.
I will. And Alex told me to tell you hello as well.
Aw, what a sweetheart. He's a great guy. I'm going to see him and Tony down at GSIC in Orlando. And that's another one of my conferences that's on bradolsen.com. and hope to see you guys out there too. It's going to be a great show, a fun place to go to a conference in Orlando, Florida, and a lot of great speakers. Go to GSIC, Galactic and Spiritual Informers Connection.com and check out the lineup. It's going to be a great show.
Yes, it was well worth it last year.
Sure was.
So from writing through the unknown, I'm going to say thank you to everyone in the chat room. Thank you to Brad. And we are going to call this episode done. And hope everyone has a wonderful night, and hope everyone has enjoyed the information that we brought forward. So, good night, everyone.
You have just listened to The Energy That Surrounds Us with your host, Michael Koff. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.